It's an honor for me to be here to kick off the Hall of Fame event. It's a very special event for me personally as well as for our organization. It's an opportunity for us to recognize those who have contributed to our sport. We recognize legends that I know personally I've known about, and now we get to see them appreciated by our organization. We also get to recognize those who are current heroes, and this Hall of Fame, personally for me, I think is very special, where I see us recognizing those, a lot of the pioneers who laid the foundation for the great success of where we are today. And they're going to be going into the Hall of Fame, and they're all alive and with us, which is a very good thing. And a lot of them are actually very young, which shows how far we've come in a very short amount of time. So with that, I want to welcome you to the Hall of Fame. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the organizers that do such a great job, our Hall of Fame committee. And it's my honor to introduce the chair of that committee, Mr. Andy Shaw, who will be our master of ceremonies, and he does a wonderful job.
So as you know, our organization was actually founded in 1891. But our first championship started in 1888. But I like to remind people that our organization was founded because our founding fathers were dissatisfied with the way the first 4 national championships were done. And they didn't like that there were fencing coaches officiating. They thought that was terrible. They felt you couldn't trust them. Of course, we've learned, I guess, that we can. They also didn't like direct elimination. They said that direct elimination, one guy may luck out, get an easy draw, and the other guy got a hard draw, and they didn't think that was fair. So it was required that we did pools. And these are the 2 main things that they really wanted to have founding fencing. And then we were the only association in the world that believed that the winner should be decided partially on how good you looked. Not in a suit or a dress, but just your form. So we would have, if it was 5-4 and you just won the bout, and the judges would then meet before you could leave the strip, and if we thought the other guy looked better, it was back to a tie, one more touch. So we had some interesting rules. Luckily, over the years, we did change some of these things. Our Hall of Fame was started in '63. That's in the 1900s. And Paul Mackler, Dr. Paul Mackler, who is still running around and traveling around the world, who's in his mid-90s, really set this going as the president of U.S. Fencing. Dr. Mackler, of course, was an Olympian, and he started it going, and Max Garrett and Andre Deladrier and James Flynn from New Jersey kind of teamed together to get the Hall of Fame started, and then it sort of faded out over the years, and then Arnie Messing and Steve Conoy decided to take it up around '95 and really make things happen again and bring the Hall of Fame back together. And with the committee members we have, so Arnie and Steve did really the major work to get this going again. And then we have other committee members, lovely Connie Yu over in San Jose is one of our members of the committee, and Cole Harkness, who's maybe one of the few, forget that, Cole Harkness, let's leave it at that. And we also have the amazing Jack Keane from New York and New Jersey from the Athletic Club, and that's our committee. So our first inductee today, going back in time, is Leonardo Tironi. Now you may not know it, but if you take it from 1903, when the University of Pennsylvania's program started, under Tironi, there have only been now totally 4 coaches. Tironi, Cesar, McConaughey, and now Andy Ma. This will put all 3 coaches from 1903 till just a couple of years ago, Andy Ma, 3 coaches covered the whole spectrum, and they'll all be in the Hall of Fame. So Leonardo Tironi came over from Italy to the United States, not to teach fencing, unlike many people from foreign countries who come here. He came here to get involved in literature and writing. And his first job when he came over was editing an Italian-American newspaper. And from that, somebody had heard that he was like an expert fencer and had competed a lot in Europe. So what happened then was he was referred to the University of Pennsylvania. And they met him, the trustees met him, and decided it would be great to start a program. So he started teaching fencing there in 1903. From that situation, PE classes, teams, In their first year, they met against Yale, and they beat the Yale team. Now, as you may or may not know, Leonardo Tironi, sorry about that, I'm sorry about that, Peter. But Henry would forgive us that we said this. So anyway, they beat the Yale team and they started to really develop this big program. But Leonardo had a couple of eccentricities. Unlike US fencing at the time, he believed professionals should be the referees. Amateur Fencers League said, we want nothing to do with you with that, that's terrible. He also believed that you should have to fence with the left hand and the right hand. Not very popular, especially if your jacket button's on the left side. So anyway, what happened was, they would start their bouts, the way he would train it, in foil, let's say, 2 touches with the left hand, and then 2 touches with the right hand, and the winner would be declared from this basis. They also, every time a touch was scored according to the rules of their organization, you would have to immediately, when you're hit, go, touch, and go back to first position. So I guess people did that if they were honest, and the others probably got yelled at if they didn't go back to first position. Anyway, that's the way he set it up. And even at Bryn Mawr, they copied this idea and did left-handed and right-handed fencing. Well, he ended up training a number of Olympians. One of the greatest of the Olympians was Chauncey Ryder McPherson. He also trained Joseph Brooks Bloodgood Parker. And what's interesting about Joseph Brooks Bloodgood Parker was that years ago, people in fencing had him listed as 2 different people because they didn't imagine that anybody had 4 names. So he was Joseph Brooks and this other guy, Bloodgood Parker. And he was listed as 2 people for many years until I said, wait a minute, that's one guy. And he became, of course, one of our great fencers. And of course, Harold Van Buskirk, who later ended up going to Texas and becoming famous in Texas, Harold Van Buskirk Memorials. And these men really set the tone of his fame for Leonardo Tironi. And that's about all I really wanted to get into, was to the fact that he coached there from 1903 to 1942. And so let's have a round of applause for Leonardo Tironi. Inductee Hans Halberstadt, I'd like to have Norm Maddox come up. Norm, are you here? Yes, he is. And assisting Mr. Maddox is Doug Nichols. Doug, if you don't know it, has been working on the history of the West Coast of fencing since the death of Charles Selberg. And so they're going to together work this out. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. I'm Norm Maddox, and I'm originally from New York. And about 25, 27 years ago, I went to San Francisco, and it was the Hans Halberstadt Fencing Club that invited me and accepted me, even though I was from New York. Now, for the 25 years that I've been a member, I've liked to recognize the fact that they are open to all comers. The attitude is very, very communal. And to speak about Hans Halberstadt, we have our own Andy Shore of the West Coast, and that would be Doug Nichols. So he has some stories about Hans Halberstadt. Doug Nichols?
Hi, my name's Doug Nichols. I'm a native Californian. That doesn't get the applause that being from New York does in this crowd, apparently. I'm the executive director of the West Coast Fencing Archive. We're just about 6 months old, and we were funded for 3 years, so we're hoping to do a lot of storytelling in the next 3 years, at least, about what's happened on the West Coast of fencing. So let me start in with Hans. Hans Halberstadt was born June 10th, 1885 in Offenbach, Germany. He took up fencing as a young man and studied under Maestro Arturo Gazzera, a graduate of the Scuola Magistrale in Italy. Gazzera also taught world and Olympic champion Helena Meyer, with whom Hans maintained a lifelong friendship. Hans emerged from World War I as a decorated war hero. Returning to competition, he traveled widely, winning many international events, and represented Germany in the 1928 Olympics in individual and team épée and team saber. One story, the first of several I'm likely to spread out over my time, is that Hans told his students in San Francisco during his ensuing years was that he kept a locker in all of the major fencing clubs in Europe, so that when he traveled to competitions, he never had to carry his equipment from one country to the next. Hans's father was Jewish, and in 1938, Hans was taken to the Buchenwald concentration camp. His brother, who lived in San Francisco at that time, arranged a bribe, and he was able to get out after only 4 weeks in the camp. He was forced by the Nazis to surrender all the gold and silver medals and trophies that he had attained in 28 years of competitive success. He arrived in San Francisco at the age of 56 with no money and no English. Established San Francisco fencing master Erich Funke Degneuf allowed Hans space to teach fencing at the Funke Saal in San Francisco, and Hans also secured a position teaching at the prestigious Olympic Club in San Francisco. He soon opened his own studio, the Halberstadt School of Fencing, at 3145 Fillmore Street in the Marina District of San Francisco. Another San Francisco fencing master, Eduardo Visconti, gifted Hans the equipment to start the club. And Hans taught at the Fillmore Street Saal and lived in a studio in the back of the Saal until his death on September 22nd, 1966. Hans also sold fencing equipment and in later years taught the fencing supply business to John McDougall, who was the founder of American Fencer Supply, which is still in business today in the San Francisco area. Hans developed a long list of strong regional and national competitors and worked with Helena Meyer during her string of U.S. national women's foil titles during her time living and working in the Bay Area. He maintained contact with his old fencing mates in Offenbach and was awarded the Gold Lion of Hesse for 50 years of service to the sport by his former club in the 1950s. Hans Halberstadt was dearly loved by those who spent time in his Saal, and the following is taken from his obituary published in American Fencing magazine and written by Jack Adams, a longtime Northern California division officer and a student of Hans. Quote, Hans's greatest gift to us was seen in his ability to make a strong response, a ready riposte, a forthright answer to any situation. It was seen in his indomitable will to make the best possible job out of life. Hans took simple pleasure in companionship and in the sharing of anecdotes, and he leaves us a wonderful heritage of stories. End quote. Of the fencers and fencing masters who can claim Hans as coach or mentor, notably for me, John McDougall and Charlie Selberg, because I was around them quite a bit, the stories they passed on are filled with humor and personality. Possibly the most oft-repeated goes like this. After a long night of teaching, Hans removed his mask to say, "Yeah, after 50 years of teaching, the only one who gets any better is me." And please forgive my imitation of Charlie Selberg imitating Hans Halberstadt. I recently confirmed an oft-told story that I had come to believe was facetious. And Selberg would often repeat the story of Hans having a special teaching mask with a hole cut in it to accommodate a cigar, which he would smoke while giving lessons. And Charlie Selberg said that Hans would puff up and down the strip with smoke billowing out of the top of his mask, and he looked like a steam engine. Now, that's a great story, and it's an indelible visual image, but really, come on. That is, until a recent event where I had a chat with George Nanamura, two-time U.S. Olympic team member in foil, and Hans Halberstadt was George's first coach when George was probably about 7 years old. And George confirmed to me not only that Hans had such a mask, but George remembers taking lessons from Hans with the cigar smoke billowing out of the top of his mask. So I think it's safe to say, for all that I never met Hans, Norman never met Hans, I don't think they make fencing masters quite like that anymore. Hans never married, never had children, and when he passed away in 1966, his nieces and nephew were going to take his collection of memorabilia, of which there was a lot, to the Goodwill. But fortunately, they offered Charlie Selberg and John McDougall the opportunity to take anything they wanted, and they rescued a large collection of photos, ephemera, books, other material, including Hans's overstuffed chair, which Selberg kept for the rest of his life, and still resides in Charlie's Saal in Southern Oregon. What was not rescued, to the best of my knowledge, was the mask with the cigar hole. So I will continue to hunt for it, and I will ask you, if you ever come across an old fencing mask with a round, cigar-sized hole at a thrift stop or buried in the back of any Saal in the country, if you run across that, please call me, because who knows, it might be Hans's. Thank you very much.
So to present the next award in our Hall of Fame inductees, we have a Hall of Famer himself, the #3 coach of the Hall of Famers from the University of Pennsylvania, David McConaughey.
It's a great pleasure to be here in person, to be able to introduce my good friend and clubmate, Larry Anastasi. Just to check in a little bit here, how many here have ever fenced Larry in épée or in foil? Show, any hands? Yeah. Very few. Arnie, raise your hand. Thank you. Well, me too. For those of us who did fence him, if I said, what was his signature action? Flying six riposte. If you stuck your blade into that thing, it was like putting it into an airplane propeller. And it didn't miss. And that was in foil or in épée. You didn't want your blade in that action. There are very few people today who still do it, or do it as well. In épée, another signature action was an incredibly long distance balestra to the knee. I could never do that. Larry could do it almost as well. When he needed a touch, he could get there fast and quick. How good was he? Larry was darn good. I remember, this is just a side story. We used to have an exercise we did as a drill, well, partner drill, where somebody would drop a glove along a wall from a certain height, and you'd stand on guard, and then when the glove began to move, you had to pin it to the wall. And it didn't, because we were fencing épée, it didn't matter where you pinned it, as long as it was before it got to the floor. Some of us could actually pin it with a lunge. There's one man in this whole world, I imagine, who could hit it with a balestra before it hit the floor. That's him. The image you have of Larry in a fencing competition was a rather serene person striding about the floor between mounds in a very long terry bathrobe, bright red. Most of us would wear a sweatsuit, something else like that. That robe was always with him. And that was also a trademark. As we know, Larry started fencing in his senior year at Temple University. He had not been a fencer before. Coach was Fred Pierce. Larry had been in track and field. And he was accustomed to being an athlete in training. He was fit, he was strong, muscular, fast, quick, the works. An athlete. There was a time when somebody said, are you an athlete? No, I'm a fencer. Well, Larry gave the lie to that one, because an athlete who could learn fencing well could succeed very well. And of course, today's world, if you're not an athlete, you get hit a lot, but not for long. It was really a revelation to have someone like Larry enter the sport at the advanced age of senior in college. Placed 11th at the NCAAs that year, in his first year of fencing. He started to win local medals, and he progressed rapidly and began to go farther afield and fence in other competitions around the area. When his college deferment was up, he was inducted into the Army. He was stationed in Germany, took up fencing again over there, and then he came back to the United States and showed up at the 1958 National Championships with a new style, a new game, a new poise, and came in 4th place in the U.S. Nationals. It was quite an entrance. That was his breakthrough. For those that never saw him fence, he was a classic on-guard fencer, erect, correct, perfectly, like sculpture. You think that would keep him from moving? Oh no. Oh no. I was on the other end of his épée or his foil lots of times. He could move. He could get off a dime like nothing. He joined the South Chisar when he came back to Philadelphia, having been at the Mountain Pentathlon Center for a period of time. Took lessons from Maestro Chisar and began to advance in the national rankings. In 1961, he fenced in the North Atlantic sectionals, which at that time encompassed everything from DC all the way up to Maine, except for the Metropolitan Division. It was a much bigger section. He fenced in the foil because it was there, and he wanted to mainly fence the épée, but he wanted to see how he'd do in the foil, get the action. Well, How he got the action was he got the gold medal. And here's the story. At that time, the Martini Rossi Company would pay the airfare of sectional champions to get to national championships, which in 1961 was in Los Angeles. And Larry said, okay, if they're going to pay my airfare for foil, I should enter the foil at the nationals. Because he was qualified to do so. So he did. At the nationals, there was an 8-man final, 5 of whom were épée fencers, by the way, because that was the early stages of the whippy, heavy electric foils, and you couldn't do these little knitting needle actions, but you used to be able to do with a conventional foil. The épée fencer could handle these things perfectly fine. He could handle it better than anybody. At the end of the round of 8, there was a three-way fence-off, a tie, Ed Richards, Marty Davis, and Larry. Larry won the barrage and was the national champion in foil. 1963, back out in LA, and once again, he fenced in the épée this time and got the gold medal in épée. So he has a national championship in both weapons. Went to the Olympic Games in 64, both weapons, 68, both weapons, and then returning from the Olympic Games, he tapered off a little bit in his fencing and resumed occupation and family life and so on. One little anecdote. Larry was normally a very quiet fencer. You know, he didn't jump up and scream and shout when he made a touch. He just made his touch and got back on guard. But every once in a while, a sneaky sense of humor would creep into things. He was fencing foil at the Old Fencers Club, and there was a fencer there who was pretty good. And every time he touched somebody, he would say, "Bing!" which I could get on your nerves after a while. So Larry fenced him, didn't say a word. Are you ahead of me yet? Larry fenced him. The fellow thought he'd made a touch and said, "Bing!" and Larry landed the post and said, "Bong!" Sneaky sense of humor. So it's a great honor to present Larry, my good friend, my clubmate, my teammate. He's a wonderful fencer, a reliable teammate, an excellent friend, and a deserving member of the Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dave. That was overwhelming. And I wish I felt as good as you make me sound. But it's an honor to get this award, and I'm very grateful to all of you involved in it. Thank you.
Before I bring up the presenter for our next guest, so it's going to be Peter Devine, but before I bring Peter Devine up here to talk about Cliff Bear, I was just mentioning to Cliff that I had a first-round pool. I was refereeing, I was directing actually, I wasn't refereeing then. I was directing a pool, I can't imagine what year it was, but Cliff was like, I don't know, 12 or 13, and the pool is getting ready to start, and Miklos Bartha comes up to me to stop me. He goes, "This man, he will be national champion, greatest fencer." And I looked at him and I said, "Great, Miklos." I was like, all right, next fencer, come on up, you know. It's like, he looked shorter than I was, which was not good at that time, or at any time, but anyway. So I thought that was very cute. Cliff's going to be national champion, that's very good. So, of course, you know what happened. So now I'd like to present Peter Devine. We're all from the same club, and in Greenwich Village. Peter Devine.
I've known Cliff for 27 years, as a friend, as a competitor, and practically as a brother. It is my very special privilege to introduce him for induction into the U.S. Fencing Hall of Fame. That Cliff is being inducted into the Hall of Fame is almost certainly no surprise to any of you. His accomplishments are nothing short of extraordinary. He was a 4-time national champion, ranked first in the US for 5 years in a row. He was the first ever men's foilist to win a Junior World Cup, the first ever men's foilist to win a Senior World Cup, and then he did it again just 2 months later, and the first ever men's foilist to be ranked in the top 10 in the whole world. And I think it can be said that by the time he retired, Cliff had become the most successful American men's foil fencer in decades, and one of the most successful of all time. And if you were following US fencing in the 1990s, you probably already know all of that. But what you almost certainly don't know, and what might surprise you, is that success in fencing didn't come quickly for Cliff, and it didn't come easily. Cliff and I started fencing at about the same time, at about the same age, at the same club, with the same coach. And while Miklos Bartha thought Cliff's unorthodox style had potential, to be honest, I didn't. And so for the first 5 years of our careers, I didn't consider Cliff to be much of a threat. And when I made my first cadet world team, Cliff was nowhere on the standings. So to be clear, what I'm saying to you is that one of the best American fencers in modern history was not very good when he started. And he took years, not weeks, not months, but years to finally figure it out. And since most of the future stars in our sport dominate early on, how could it be, you might ask, that the one who perhaps became the best of all of us struggled for so long? The answer, as it turns out, is quite simple. Cliff's innate talent was not for fencing itself. It was broader, more useful. His talent was, and still is really, at setting a goal and working as hard as possible to obtain it. He wanted to win more than anyone else. And when he finally started to, he didn't stop. His grit and determination allowed him to train harder and longer, year after year, than all the rest. And by the time Cliff and I walked arm in arm into the opening ceremonies of the Atlanta Olympics, having spent much of the last 10 years training, traveling, and competing together, Cliff was well on his way to leaving me and everyone else in the dust. For those of you who've actually seen Cliff fence, I think you know what I'm talking about. It was clear to anyone watching that he'd rather chew his arm off rather than lose a bout. I remember a World Cup in Spain when he was fencing one of the top-ranked fencers in the world. Early in the bout, his opponent advanced down the strip with grace and confidence. Suddenly, Cliff curled into a mass of arms and legs as he prepared with all his might for an attack in preparation. When he unfurled, he unleashed an attack with such intensity that it launched him off and literally parallel to the strip. His blade, arm, head, body, feet formed a straight line 3 feet above the strip, flying through the air toward his opponent. His tip landed perfectly, the light went off, and then Cliff fell face first to the strip with a crash that made the entire venue stop and look.
I got a yellow card.
You got a red card. Touch was disallowed. But everyone around thought it was perhaps the most remarkable fencing action they'd ever seen in their entire life. The other fencer was beside himself and had no idea how he could possibly fence someone who was capable of that. Cliff won the rest of the bout very easily. Despite all that Cliff has done, and all the young fencers he has inspired in the process, in many ways, Cliff's story in fencing is one of what could have been, rather than what was. He retired at the ripe old age of 23, having achieved a legendary career in so few years. Had he continued to compete, there's no telling what he would have accomplished. But his abrupt retreat from fencing at the very top of his game is in keeping with the same personal drive that got him so far. He decided to turn his ambition to the professional world, to pursue success without the distraction of fencing. Unsurprisingly, Cliff found a welcome home on Wall Street, where his special brand of relentlessness has been very well received. When he got his latest promotion at UBS, he told me he's known there as the ankle biter. Biting ankles in his dogged pursuit of clients. On Wall Street, at least, it's hard to imagine a more flattering nickname. More recently, Cliff has accomplished another, more important feat. He's convinced Ariel Haves, who's here tonight, to agree to marry him. Being married myself and having spent so much of my life with Cliff, I can tell you that being married to a person who would quite literally rather chew his arm off than win a silly fencing bout is going to be a very interesting experience indeed. But in all seriousness, I think Cliff has, for the first time, met his match in Ariel Haves. So, Cliff, I know I speak for everyone here when I say thank you for becoming the trailblazer that you were and for helping to inspire a whole new generation of American fencers. Please join me in congratulating Cliff Bayer for his induction into the U.S. Fencing Hall of Fame.
Peter, thank you so much. That was really amazing. Really very heartfelt. Thank you. Well, I'd like to start by thanking the committee, Don Anthony, Andy Shaw, Steve Canoy, Arnie Messing for putting together such a wonderful evening. I'm so honored to be named as one of the entrants into this year's Hall of Fame. It's also wonderful to be inducted into the Hall of Fame along two longtime friends and teammates of mine, Iris Zimmerman and Bucky Leach. I remember the first time I met Iris. It was 1992. I was 15 and I arrived at the Junior Olympics in Colorado Springs and the airline lost my fencing bag. Naturally, I panicked. After borrowing a few items from my teammates, including Peter, I was still short a fencing mask. I immediately thought of Bucky, and I asked him if there might be anyone from the Rochester Fencing Club that might have an extra one. I have a small head, so maybe one of the younger fencers, I asked? He said, well, Iris just finished winning the under 12, under 15, under 17, and under 20 women's foil events. So she's done, so you can use her mask. I think Bucky was playing some type of cruel joke on me because when I saw Iris, an 11-year-old girl at the time, and tried on her mask, there was no way it was going to fit on my small head. She immediately labeled me a peahead. And I defensively called her a melonhead. And a great friendship was born. But in all seriousness, fencing has done so much for me. It taught me a great deal about myself and really shaped me as a person. I've learned the benefit of hard work, setting goals, making sacrifices, and if you want something bad enough, anything, if you're literally willing to chew your own arm off, it's all possible. And when I think back and reflect about my time competing now 13 years later, I don't think about any specific competition or victory. I think about the overall journey I experienced and how lucky I am to have had all those experiences. I'd like to thank my first coach, Miklos Bartha, Yefim Litvon, and all my teammates. Peter, we made each other better over the 25 years that we knew each other, that we've known each other along the way in literally every way. And I really appreciate you being here in person. It means a lot to me. Finally, I'd like to thank my parents, for without them, none of this would have been possible. Picking me up at fencing practice, taking me to tournaments, celebrating with me at my victories and consoling me in my losses. I'm so happy we're here to celebrate this special moment together. Thank you very much. Thank you.
To introduce Bucky Leach into the Hall of Fame, let's have Ira Zimmerman.
So I think actually Bucky's probably more nervous about what I'm going to say than what the speech is about, than me giving the speech. But I assure you, don't worry. I talked all about how you're a super mellow and a laid-back coach. I'm just kidding. So the people here who are at Fencers Club can really know what the training was like in Rochester Fencing Club. So this particular intro speech for Bucky has been over 30 years in the making. He officially started his coaching career at the Rochester Fencing Club in 1980 in downtown Rochester, New York. It wasn't long after he opened those doors that Felicia and I walked through them, along with Tad and Mary Joy Clinton, Sue Clinton, Andy Gerhardt, Alex Wood, and many others. In a span of less than 10 years, Bucky's students dominated national fencing tournaments. My sister and Sean McLean used to win cadet and junior events at Junior Olympics in both foil and épée. However, Bucky wanted more for himself and his students. So he set his course to the international stage, and within a short span of time, became world champions and Olympians. Most of you in the room can probably remember that it was during the 1990s people moved from around the country and around the world to train with Bucky. Many of them lived in Sue Clinton's house, which was and still is down the street from the fencing club. Her house and the RFC became a fencing boarding school of sorts with people like Juliana Sykes, Ann Marsh, Jane Hull Carter, and Susie Paxton that came to Rochester for the sole purpose of fencing. So the question is, why did everyone want to move to upstate New York, where it snows pretty much 11 months of the year, to train with some American coach who liked to listen to Bob Dylan and loved hamburgers? Still does love hamburgers. The answer is that Bucky Leach was the first breakthrough American-born coach that was innovative enough, dedicated enough, and demanding enough to want to shift the status quo of American fencing. From the start, Bucky challenged the idea of what it meant to be a fencer. Driven by his background in pentathlon, he knew the importance of training like a professional athlete. He encouraged his students to dedicate their time and efforts to fencing, not as a hobby, but a legitimate sport. I put encouraged in quotes. This table laughs because we all train with him. For the fencers at the RFC, school was just a pit stop between practices. So, I wouldn't do the speech justice if I didn't tell the story I'm about to tell, especially since Susan and Ann are out in the audience. When I was in 7th grade, Bucky decided that a group of us, with Susan and Ann, would get up early and swim at the local YMCA before school. He would drive 20 minutes out of the way to pick me up at 5:30 in the morning and would drop us all off at school afterwards. Bucky was a swimmer. I was not. I signed up for fencing, and so did Susan and Ann, but nevertheless, we did swim. However, he did manage to add elements of fencing into the workout. One day, Bucky decided that we should work on our fleshes and told us to flesh into the pool from the edge. No, it was more like flesh into the pool from the edge. To which we responded with laughter and snickering. He responded, dive in to the not for suitable for the audience pool. So we got out and we fleshed into the pool. Well, the lifeguard kind of gave us confused looks, but he knew not to question Bucky while he was coaching us in swimming, us fencers in swimming. Although I never really used the flesh, swimming must have helped me somewhat because a year later, I won the Cadet World Championships at age 14. So maybe it was sort of worth it, sort of. The second adjective I use to describe Bucky is dedicated. After having worked with a few coaches besides him, I can honestly say that his dedication to the sport and to his students is really remarkable, almost to the point of insanity. I would be remiss if I did not mention all the crazy van trips that we had to various tournaments, often to places in the middle of nowhere in Canada. So Sue Clinton reminded me that Bucky would consider a destination that is 12 to 16 hours away as a drivable van trip. Yeah. Fencing tournaments were almost invariably during the dead of winter where no one but Bucky would drive an old, probably actually didn't pass inspection, 18-passenger van 12 hours to a fencing tournament. In order to make things more affordable for our families, Bucky used to drive us up the day before the competition, then drive back the night of the competition. So ice on that road, plus a tired and he was often angry Bucky driving. It wasn't the most cheerful car trip. So in order to stay awake, Bucky used to roll down the windows, blast in that cold air, and blast Bob Dylan. I also don't ever remember putting on a seatbelt, and I'm still wondering how our parents ever let us go on any of these trips. So, I don't know. It was a miracle. The last adjective I used to describe Bucky is demanding. I think it's a little bit of an understatement. So anyone who has trained with him knows that he wants nothing else than perfection. I once did about 200 advanced lunges after losing a tournament with my stuff on because I didn't do the advanced lunges correctly during the tournament. So I had to stop with my stuff on at the end, stand there 200 advanced lunges. At practices, there was no sitting, so you guys know where that rule comes from. There were no vacations, no water breaks during lessons, no stopping, and no questioning Bucky. There was none of that. You never were at a loss to figure out exactly what he wanted from you, although sometimes messages were lost despite his best efforts. At one fencing competition, Bucky was angry with Felicia when she was done because she had done some action, and she was sort of confused. She's like, Bucky, I did what you said, low, flick, high. Low, flick, high. So Bucky was like, I didn't say low, flick, high. I said low, high. So sometimes his messages were misconstrued, but not very often. That's one of my favorites. It's okay. But he got the point across, and we listened to him, and we all were better for that. So there's no question that Bucky started something historical in upstate New York, and he continues to produce great fencers in his current town of New York City. Most recently, his women's foil student, Nzinga Prescott, won a women's foil Grand Prix in Marseille, France. Amazing. Yeah! So, Bucky, from all of our students and everyone you have worked with over the past 30 plus years, congratulations on your induction today into the U.S. Hall of Fame. We look forward to what you'll do in the next 30 years.
So, I thought I had a strange name when I came here today, but Bloodgood and Funky. Those names were, I couldn't believe those. So, I'm excited to be here. It was great to have Iris introduce me. It's great to see Cliff here. I have to tell a story about Cliff. I've been thinking about this story for a long time because it's about Cliff and Iris. And everybody is, Cliff, you did great things, okay? But we're at the Olympics, and the first thing Cliff says to me, he's got his credential, and he says, Bucky, this credential is a babe magnet. Okay? He's like, there are volunteers everywhere. It's fantastic. And I said, Cliff, I really don't think it's gonna work so well for me. And he says, no, it's okay. There are some older volunteers here too. And then I related the story to Iris, and Iris and Cliff had been friends for a long time. So Aaron, Smart, Felicia, we're all sitting at a table, and I told the story about Cliff. And Iris looks at me, and with a very sincere, naive look says, but Cliff has a girlfriend. And I looked at Aaron, and Aaron is like, I don't know. That's the way she is. So, I had written some stuff down, and left it at the hotel. So I'm kind of winging it here a little bit. I know there's a lot of things I want to say, but mostly I want to thank a lot of people for a lot of the stuff that's happened to me through my career. First with Arnie, Andy, and Steve for putting this together and kind of trying to preserve the history of fencing, because in general, I think as a community we ignore our history. We have a lot of good stuff that's happened, but we don't pay attention to it. And to give you a perspective on that, one day I'm sitting at a bar with a couple of friends of mine, Jeff Salmon and Alan Coover. And a friend of ours is sitting at another table, his name is Dave Blake, with a bunch of young referees. And Dave Blake comes over to us and he says, I'm sitting with these young referees and they say to me, we know Alan and we know Jeff, but who's that little guy in between them? So as exciting as this is, and as good as it feels, it's, our stars burn brightly for a short time. And Cliff, I was going to say, you won that tournament in St. Petersburg, and you know that it's a good thing Monique de Bruin didn't fence in that. That's true. Cliff, as good as he was, could never beat Monique de Bruin. Okay, so some of the people, again, I'd like to thank, and I learned a lot over my time. One of the people was Emmett Kaidanov. When I was a young kid and I was just getting started coaching, I went to Emmett for about 2 weeks and just spent a lot of time following him, and I really want to thank him for the time that he spent with me, and he really made me understand a little bit more about fencing. Another person, Felicia Zimmerman. I learned more from coaching Felicia than I probably learned from anybody else. We would do, I would give her lessons and I had this idea of what she should do, and it was a great idea. And she would do something completely different and I'd be like, well, shit, excuse me. I'm sorry, that was, yes. That was a much better idea than the idea that I had. So it was a constant learning process. And then she also taught, we would start to go to international competitions, and Felicia started a little bit ahead of me going to the events. And we would go at the airport and you would see Felicia and me, and I would be the adult and she was the kid. But basically, it was the other way around. I would just follow Felicia, looking like I was in charge, but wherever she would go, she'd look at the sign and I would follow her. So, yeah, that's my first couple years at a competition. Ann Marsh is here, it's great. She taught me that throwing up before a competition was not a bad thing. Susie Paxson, who's not here today, was great. She taught me that anybody could achieve anything if they had enough desire. Susie had the number 32, because in those days, if you made a 32, you could be on the Olympic team. So she had 32 written everywhere. Everywhere you would look, there was the number 32, and that was her goal. And she just drove herself to do that. And it made me realize that if you worked hard enough at something, that you could accomplish it. Carla Mae Richards, is Carla Mae here? Okay, Carla Mae was a great help for me. She was a great help for coaches, for me. I grew up with her. I was the kid who always forgot to send his entry in for the competition, or had the late entry. And then when I became national coach, I was the national coach who forgot to turn in his budget, or actually forgot to do his budget. So it was important to be around Carla. So basically, there were a lot of people that helped me along the way. Tom Zimmerman, Tom and Iris's father, or Tom and Christine, mother and father. Tom taught me that you could learn something from anybody. One day he said to me, Iris needs to duck more. Iris was like 13, 14 years old. She's got to duck more. And I thought, why am I listening to this parent? And So at the World Championships, Iris is fencing with Margarita Grambassi. It's her first World Championships. It's the final, it's a gold medal bout. 3 times, Iris ducks, 1 light, scores the touch. Iris wins 15-13. And it was like a realization for me that no matter who told me anything, I would listen to them, okay? Never ignore anybody's advice. So thank you, Thomas, for that. So anyway, I really do appreciate the accolades. It's great to be here with Cliff and with Iris and with Hans Halberstadt. Like, none of us fencing coaches today are nearly as cool as those old fencing coaches, but it's great to be great to be recognized with them. I think I got pretty much everybody who I wanted to thank, but I probably missed him because, again, no paper. So again, thank you very much. Like yelling at a referee. You gotta yell at him, you gotta come back and yell at him, you gotta come back and yell at him again. But I gotta tell you a story about Iris, because Iris is gonna be recognized next. Iris is like the toughest kid you'll ever meet. I would give lessons to Felicia, and I would yell at Felicia for about a half an hour. And finally, after half an hour of just yelling, and yelling, she would start to cry and then hyperventilate. And the hyperventilating drove me crazy, because I'd have to stop my lesson, and then I'd have to calm her down. So I'd have to take 10 minutes just to kind of calm her down. I would try to tell her a joke, and then she'd start to hyperventilate again. It was terrible. So Iris is 9 years old, and again, in my normal style, I start to yell at her for like 20, it took about 20 minutes before she started to have a reaction, and she started to hyperventilate. Minus the expletives. Iris, you can't hyperventilate. Your sister hyperventilates all the time. I have to stop the lesson. It takes me 10 minutes to fix it. There's no hyperventilating. Iris looked at me and she said, okay. And that was it. There was no hyperventilating after that. So Iris is an amazing kid. She really is. So congratulations on your acceptance also.
So just for a quick break before we get to Iris, I want to just tell you about things that Bucky and I used to have a relationship together. So in the old rules, that's a joke. It's a joke. I live in Louisiana, they'd kill me. Okay, so I used to be a very strict director, referee, whatever you call it. And although I dressed bizarrely, I had strict rules. And the rules used to never allow, even signaling, gesturing was illegal, any kind. And I took it very seriously. Put your hands down, and luckily I could referee and still watch for gestures. So he insisted on making gestures to Felicia while she's already killing people. So I would turn to him and I'd whip out a red card, which means nothing anyway to spectators, but I'd go, we had to do red cards first to a spectator. Go, red card, and make sure the scorekeepers, they used to be scorekeepers in fencing. I go, red card, write it down, Bucky Leach, red card. And the person would write it down, I'd have those sisters, the Thompson twins, no, that's later probably. Okay, so I had people writing down this stuff. And then, sure enough, he'd get desperate. Maybe someone hit Felicia one more time. And he'd go, no, or do something. And I turned to black card, and he saw me reach into my jacket. He'd throw the folding chair that he was on. He was leaning on these chairs. He'd run fast across the room. And I remember the first time I thought, I can't black card somebody who isn't here. He ran away, he's gone. So I put the black card back. I thought that's just ridiculous. I can't black card him if I get the joy of doing this to someone and then someone goes, So I put it away. And then like every couple of months, this would happen. I'd go, but before I could get it out, he'd run. So really it wasn't a black card because he didn't see it. And we would do this for a while, and then I started impersonating Bucky running to the Clintons and other people who were in the team at that time. You know what I mean. Anyway, to introduce Ira Zimmerman to the Hall of Fame, we have Bucky Leach. Are you doing the introduction?
No.
You're not. I lied. Of course, it's Felicia Zimmerman. Now, you know, I had the distinct privilege to referee both sisters' first national title. One, I think, was Colorado, and I think it was Fort Myers.
Yes, right.
Colorado Springs?
Thank you. Best for last, right? So thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Andy and the committee. You know, I think everyone's clear about Iris's results. She was the first world champion for the U.S. At the age of 14, cadet world champion, and it was in Paris. And it, you know, it was an amazing time. I was hiding behind these bushes, like, because I just was so nervous. So I'm like, there's these bushes, like, peeking through. Did she get the touch? Did she get the touch? Did she get the touch? And she just took it so relaxed. And it was about her attitude on strip and her attitude while she was fencing. It was always really fun. Like, she always made it a joke. She's fencing Trellini, she's killing her, 5-0, and all of a sudden her tip's not working, and she's like looking at her tip, she's like, come here, and she's testing. She's like, oh, tip's not working, ha 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 ha. And I'm like, oh my God, so nerve-wracking. And she's like, oh, fix the tip, and she'd throw her weapon and grab another one. You know, and she had this great attitude. It was just very carefree when she was on strip. I mean, she was intense, but she was very carefree. And I remember we were in Canada at a competition when it was really, truly a North American Cup. And the Canadians decided to change the rules of how we're going to qualify for the final. So instead of DEs, we were down to 16 fencers, and they made 2 pools of 8. And the pool was Iris Zimmerman, myself, and Susie, and another person. And then the other pool was a couple Canadian people, and Melanie Jones and a few other people. So all of us are really nervous. It's the Olympic year, and so we're all trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean? Who's going to make the top 8? You know, how many bouts do I have to? Anne's calculating how many bouts she has to win by how many indicators. And Iris strolls over and she's like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm making it out of this round. And I'm like, all right, great, fantastic. I'm really nervous, anyway. You know, and she was a great teammate. You know, she always made it fun, and, you know, she's always the youngest on the team, but she was always there, just always by the side of the strip, water, bucket for Anne. But she was always ready. But, you know, I want to talk a little bit like Peter did about, you know, what is it like to be the sister, to be a teammate. I'll give you a little glimpse of Iris outside of fencing. You know, it started off as, you know, 2 sisters. We would pummel each other at any moment, except for at the fencing club. We were just sort of best well-behaved as possible. But in the car trips, imaginary line, you're over the line. You're over my line, you're over my line. And then we, you know, get going. But, you know, Iris had a very soft side, which was she carried a stuffed yellow monkey with her everywhere. Every tournament, she had her little monkey with the little tropical shirt, and this was Empire State Games that she brought it with her. She always had her little monkey. I think you were, what, 11, 12 years old? And she lost it at Empire State Games. We left the dormitories, she lost her monkey, and it was devastating. I can't fence, I don't have my monkey. But she carried that with her. She always had little trinkets with her that always made her feel comfortable, feel good, feel at home. And 10 years later, my mom found a similar monkey and gave it to her, and I think she has it sealed in a glass jar. And, you know, when she was at the World Championships that year in Paris, where she won. The bout before, she's, waiting to fence the gold medal match. And I'm thinking, okay, I gotta really be positive for her. I have to really think of something good to say. I'm so nervous. She's fencing for the gold medal. And she says, Felicia, there's this really cute boy that I've met. I saw him, and she's right, it's just minutes before she has to fence the gold medal match, and she's asking me about boys. About meeting boys, about how am I going to talk to him, what should I say to him? He's French. And I thought, okay. I mean, exactly, focus. But when she put that mask on, it was just all business, and then just this lightness about her. But now, she brings that same intensity and humor and love and passion and compassion to the fencing club and to her family and to her extended family here today at Rochester Fencing Club. And even to the women's foil team. I remember, when she was on the road trying to make the 2008 Olympic team. Fortunately, she didn't make it, but that time was very important for her. Even though she wasn't fencing her best for herself to make the team, she wanted to make sure that the team qualified, made the slot. Was important for her that the team had the slot for the 2008 Olympics, and that she wanted to be there for the team at every one of those Team World Cups. She wanted to help the team as much as possible. What you may or may not know is she has her MBA. She's a mother of a almost 1-year-old precocious, blonde-headed, blue-eyed baby with German genes. She's president of the Stanford Alumni. She works at the Monroe County Sports Commission in Rochester, New York. She volunteers her time there. And what's interesting is she does so much for the fencing club. She's on the Facebook, she does all the social media, and her favorite classes are the beginner classes. She loves teaching any of the intro classes, no offense guys, but she loves to teach the intro. She loves to introduce fencing to the community. She loves to introduce fencing to kids. She likes that feedback when someone for the first time holds a weapon in their hand and goes, "This is so cool." She just enjoys that so much, and she loves teaching the beginners class. She has such a big heart. So just to make sure to keep this short, I just want to make sure that you all know a little bit about her outside of fencing. Her heart, her dedication, her compassion. That is what Iris Zimmerman's about. And congratulations to my best friend, business partner, confidant, teammate, and my little sister. Oh, absolutely.
I got to come up twice. Yes. The monkey actually sits in Emma's room, and I make sure he's watching her when she sleeps. I'm not just. It's my turn to cry. I get emotional because I just thanks. My sister introduced me. It was really nice, and I have pull it together. I'm not going to hyperventilate. I'm so fortunate, and I'm so fortunate to be inducted with two of one of my best teammates and friends, Cliff, and a person who was like a second father to me, my life, and Anne. Susan and Felicia. So, it's getting old. I gotta get over it. Okay. So I am incredibly honored. I wanted to say thank you. And I'm honored to join some great fencers and some great coaches in the Hall of Fame. There are so many people I want to thank, but thankfully I'm the type of person who makes sure that everyone knows that I am so grateful to them. So I do, however, want to take the opportunity to thank my family. Thank you to my mom and dad, who have sacrificed in order to provide me with every opportunity that they did not have in their lives. And I also want to thank my sister Felicia. I can't thank her enough. My older sister has always been my greatest supporter in my life and has often sacrificed, made some serious personal sacrifices so that her little sister could do better. So that means a lot to me. My sister and I used to be teammates and competitors, thank you. And in our new chapter in our life, we own a fencing club. And I'm so grateful that we are a part of something bigger than ourselves. As time passes, people will always forget that the results that you have and what you did for the sport, but I hope that every kid that walks in through our fencing club is better because they did walk through our doors and try this sport. And really, and this is so honest, is that at the end of the day, I'm such a fan of the sport and I love it. So I really just want to thank you, and I hope I pass that on to you guys, and I hope that you know that I just want to make sure that everyone enjoys the sport. So I am so incredibly thankful and overjoyed. So, and this last year I had my kid, and this year is probably one of the best days I have to say besides having my kid last year. So thank you.
I want to thank all of you, I live in the South, all of you, for being here tonight. I want to also mention who the inductees are going to be for next year. We have Ella Kern. Ella Kern bought a book on Broadway in 72nd Street for about a nickel and taught himself to fence and trained Albie Axelrod. Captain Hippolyta Nicholas was the first coach at the Fencers Club. He'll be inducted next year. He was known more for his cooking than his fencing, but he did great things starting that club, and it started on 9th Street and 6th Avenue, right across from the Jefferson Market. Jamie Melcher is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame next year. Dick Oles, the coach from Johns Hopkins University. Ed Vabel, the first American to win the Martini and Rossi in Epé, and he was my next door neighbor. He started me in fencing. Ivan Lee, Vladimir Nazlimov, Aaron Smart, and Keith Smart. So congratulations to them. We'll see you next year in some city. And thank you very much for coming.